Hello.
Hey there.
How's it going? Welcome to Plant That Sis podcast. My name's Taryn.
And I am Tate.
And we're here to just chat with you about houseplants and things.
Hello, everybody.
Howdy.
Hey. How's it going? What's up?
What's new with you, Tate?
Nothing much. Just excited to talk about a worm compost today. What about you? Are you excited as I am?
I'm so excited to learn about what it takes to have a large colony of worms as pets. I can't wait to hear about it.
It's going to be great.
Pets that do chores. It's my favorite thing.
It's a work animal. Let's face it.
Let's face it.
I guess I'll just go ahead and jump right to it. Today, we're going to talk about a vermicompost. So what that is, why I think most people should have something like a setup like this, and why it's a win-win situation. So a vermicompost is essentially a compost that has worms in it. So instead of like a traditional compost where you put your food in and it takes a really, really long time, a vermicompost actually can take less time because you have worms in there actively feeding on your food scraps. Essentially, what a vermicompost is it's a way to turn your food scraps into fertilizer. So it's kind of similar to a normal compost, but instead of it just having your food scraps out there in your compost ditch, you have worms as well that kind of speed up the process. So basically, these worms eat all of our, plant-based food scraps. So obviously you can't put in any meat or dairy products because that will attract other pests and you don't want to worry about that. But any fruits or veggie scraps that you have, the worms will eat them. Even if they're moldy and you think that they're gross and they should just be thrown out, the worms will eat them. And then essentially they create a nutrient-rich organic fertilizer that you can use. So it's kind of a win-win situation because you're not going to have to go out and buy fertilizer, and you get rid of your food scraps in a sustainable way. You're not just throwing them out. So
yeah, that's gotta feel good.
Yeah, and I will say my plants seem to freaking love it. They seem to love it way more than any fertilizer that I bought at a store. So
nice.
Yeah, they seem to be living
for it. Good.
It's that good. Yeah, we feed them real good here. Everybody eats. Okay, so I'm going to talk about how the setup kind of works and give a broad overview before I go into the details, because I think if I just jump into the details, it can be kind of confusing. Once you get it all set up and it's kind of going, it kind of self-sustains a little bit, so there's not a whole lot of maintenance and upkeep, but just setting it up, is kind of a process.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's that confusing. I hope I can explain it to where it's not confusing. Taryn, if it's confusing, it's your job to be like, Tate, what do you mean?
All right.
That's your job. I'm assigning you a job.
I can handle that.
Okay. All right. So here is a broad overview of how the system works, and we will get to the details of actually setting this up in a little bit. So don't worry about the details. Just try to get a broad view. So,
you're just painting the picture for us.
Yes,
right now.
We're just painting the picture. So
close your eyes, visualize. I'm just kidding. I don't know what you're doing in life. Maybe don't close your eyes if you're driving.
Yeah, if you're driving, keep them open. But yes, okay, so broad overview. The worms basically live inside some kind of container. So for me, I have them in plastic bins. Some people do it in 5-gallon buckets.
Mm-hmm.
Other people do it in other, there's just, something, it's a container that you can drill holes into. So obviously not
well, you want something that's not going to break down, which is why you would use plastic, right? You don't want to use wood or anything.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I was well, you can drill into wood, but yeah, that'll start rotting.
Right.
So plastic is good. I would go with plastic.
If you'd like to explore your own materials, you can explore some material options, but plastic is what...
Yeah, I use plastic. I'm sitting here trying to think of other stuff for some reason, but whatever. So basically, they're in some kind of container that does not break down, and they're in a kind of soil and bedding mixture, and we'll get into that. But how it works on the day-to-day is when you kind of save up all your food scraps for a week, put it in a Tupperware container. I have a little bin that I put them in.
Do you keep that in your fridge?
I don't actually.
Gotcha.
I
So
just
you
keep it
like,
next to
have
my
it.
trash can.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the way the bin works is it's like, it has a lid on it so it doesn't get smelly or anything. Once you
Gotcha.
open it, it can get smelly, but if
Yeah.
it's closed, it's good. So I just keep it next to my trash can. And what you're going to do is every week, you'll go out and you'll basically just feed the worms. You'll kind of take all your food scraps out, kind of bury it in their little compost situation you got going on. You close the lid and then you leave it for the next week.
Nice.
And then as time goes on, the worms eat the food and they make worm castings, or they poop, right? And that sounds kind of gross, but if you do this correctly, there is no smell at all. The worm castings don't have any scent. The only time a smell could happen is if the food starts rotting, like if there's too much food in there, not enough worms or something like that. We'll get into that later though. But anyways, as time goes on, the bin will kind of start to fill up with more and more worm castings, and that is what you will use for fertilizer. That is that rich organic material that your plants will freaking die for, or live for, I should say.
Thrive for.
Exactly. They'll be thriving. So as time goes on, the bin will kind of start to fill up. And this is where you will put another bin on top with holes drilled in the bottom with a new setup with some soil and some bedding, and we'll get to this later. And essentially the worms will yes, a fresh bin on top. The worms will crawl up into it because there's holes in the bottom.
Like basically once it gets so full, they can reach the holes.
Yeah,
and that's how they know.
Because you just stack it directly on top of the worm castings, so the worms will get a sense of that new soil, and they don't necessarily like being in their poop all the time, so they'll kind of crawl up and into that, and then that's when you take that original bin that's now just full of worm castings. You can take that out, and the worms are in their new bin, and you have a whole bin full of worm castings, and then the cycle kind of continues.
Nice.
So we're gonna get into like the details of this, but that's a broad overview of how it works.
Yeah,
I hope that kind of made sense.
That's honestly already clearing up some questions I had. One of my questions is always like, how do you know when the fertilizer or the castings are ready? Like, how do you know?
Yeah.
And do you have to do a process? But I remember you talking about the worms crawling up. So that makes sense.
Yes. And you can tell because the soil inside gets really dark.
Mm-hmm.
Gets really, really dark. And that's when it's kind of time to it just looks like all like worm castings instead of soil or whatever you had in there before. When you're doing it, it's kind of
start to tell.
Yeah, you can just tell like visually. Yeah. So
cool.
So the worm castings are what you use to fertilize your plants. They are very, very nutrient rich, and like I said earlier, my plants freaking love them. I just poured some basically worm casting tea, which I'll get into later, on some of my kale, my spinach, and they are just popping off. So I'm also going to start fertilizing everything else because they seem to really like it.
That's exciting.
And it's a win-win because you have less food waste.
Yep.
And you're getting free fertilizer. I mean, those food waste, that's just going to go in the trash anyways.
Right.
So why not make it work for you?
Exactly. Just like investing.
Yeah, exactly. It is kind of an investment. I mean, it's not that. You can set up a DIY, like, Vermicompost relatively cheap. I mean, I'm a broke college student, and I was able to kind of do some of it with some like birthday money. So
yeah.
It's definitely very affordable. Like, you can make it very affordable and very customizable.
For sure.
Okay, so here's what you will need. Here are the materials.
Materials.
We like to say. Okay, so first of all, you'll need a place to put this in. So in general, the worms like a dark location, so like either in a garage or a shed or outside in the shade. So I have mine just outside in the shade, and that seems to be doing fine. If it is outside, you do need to like be wary of like weather conditions. So if it starts to rain or freeze and you leave them out there and have to go save them later.
Like Tate, she's speaking from
like
experience.
I did.
There's been several mass extinction events with these worms.
Oh, yeah, it's a learning process, but the worms seem pretty hardy because they are still out there.
I can't believe they've survived.
They're still thriving. I'll get into my experience in a little bit. Okay, so once you have a place for it, it can be in a garage or a shed or outside in the shade. Again, it shouldn't smell. There should be no smell, so that's why a lot of people do have them inside because there's no smell.
I think that's something that's a common misconception, too. Like, it doesn't smell, bold, underline, highlight. And then that's a good way to tell if something's wrong, right? Like if it's starting to stink, then something's wrong.
Yeah, Absolutely. If it starts to smell, then yeah, there's an issue or there's some kind of thing off. So this system kind of is all about balance. And so we'll talk about that as we talk about the setup.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
When it comes to location, like deciding where you're going to put your worm compost, is there a certain temperature that they, like as far as heat goes, like if I put them in my garage, but when it gets to the heat of the summer, is that going to be an issue, or do you have to do anything to keep them cool?
I don't think so. I mean, see, mine are outside, and that's because I didn't know about the whole heat thing. Online, sources vary in what they say and like how to do it. I would just try it and see what happens. My worms are able to, I mean, they've been outside and they get mostly shade, so they get sun some part of the day and they're still doing fine. So I would think that they would be fine.
Cool.
In your garage.
Got it.
Yeah. But like I said, you can just always keep checking in on them, see what's up. You don't really have to touch them or anything. You just have to like go in there, see if they're alive.
Okay, yeah, that's good.
Yeah, we'll get into that though in a little bit. All right, so what you're going to need. You're going to need 3 plastic tubs. So the size of these tubs depends on how much food waste you produce. So me and my boyfriend, we live together and we don't produce as much food waste, say as like a family of 4, you know what I mean? So it kind of depends on the food, how much food waste you produce. So I just used a large plastic tub. I don't remember the exact dimensions, but I literally just went to my nearest Lowe's and bought one of those plastic tubs.
Like the storage container.
Yes.
Tubs.
Yeah, like a storage tub. Exactly. And you also want to make sure that these tubs are not clear. So you want the sun to stay out of them. So make sure that they're opaque. Mine are like a blue color. So that works.
They like it dark.
They can be, yes, they like it dark. They're worms, right? They want to be underneath the ground. So they like it dark. You'll also need an electric drill because you will need to drill holes into the plastic. I used a really crappy electric drill that I have, and it took me like hours because it literally kept dying as I was trying to drill holes in this thing. And I eventually just had to call my dad and be like, "Can I use your drill? Can you drill holes in this? Because it's taking too long." You'll also need some soil. You'll need some food scraps. So no Mary.
No Mary.
No Marys. Sorry, Mary.
Just kidding, Mary. We love you.
JK. No meat or dairy. Us in the South just like combining words so much.
We do.
No meat or dairy. Just fruit and vegetables. I've also used like tortillas or bread and that kind of stuff. As long as there's no like, dairy products and that kind of stuff, it should be fine. And you also need some bedding. So when I say bedding, I mean a dried organic material. So you can use shredded paper, you can use shredded cardboard, dried leaves, wood clippings, maybe from like a lawn, like if you mow your lawn and you have a bunch of like all the extra grass clippings, wood chips, etc. So that kind of thing. I usually use, so when I first set up this, my system, I used a like wooden hamster bedding, or it maybe actually be rabbit bedding from like a pet store.
Like little shavings almost.
Yes, like wood shavings basically. But I've also used shredded paper, and I've also used lawn clippings from when we mow the lawn. So just anything dried. You can use dried leaves, basically dry organic material. And if you are going to use paper or cardboard, make sure it's not lined with plastic. So that can be kind of tricky. That's why I first just went and bought like the wood hamster bedding, because I wasn't sure about the whole plastic thing. To guarantee. Yeah. But now that I know, I have used shredded paper before, and I was wary about the ink, but it doesn't seem to be a problem for me. But yeah, just kind of be careful about that kind of stuff. And then after that, you will need your worms. So only certain species of worms will work for this vermicompost. So don't go outside and like dig in your yard and find the worms and then use those, because those worms aren't really going to eat your food scraps as well, because they'll tend to like want to go deeper into the soil than the worms that we use for our vermicompost. So the species that I use is called a red wiggler.
Red wigglies.
Taryn loves that. We call them our red wigglies. And I got them from, Uncle Jim's Worm Farm, I think is what it's called. And I just ordered them online and they shipped them to me. And it was super an easy process. But yeah, don't go outside and
harvest
dig for
worms.
Don't harvest worms from outside. The red wigglers, they will eat any and all food waste way better than any worms you'll find outside. And they also will do a lot better in a container, because just in general, they don't like to dig as deep as your normal worms would outside. And just keep in mind that you should try to keep your worms inside the container. I can't, ethically say to go, if you're done with it, just go release all your worms. Don't do that. Make sure they stay in the container because they are not native to the whole, US or wherever you are. So,
but Tate,
disclaimer.
My garden would love to have some extra worms. Why can't I just put some extra worms in my garden?
Well, so these worms aren't the same as the worms you have in your area. So they may change the soil and they alter it a lot, make it a lot different than what it is, and that can be a problem. It can also just cause, like, everything in nature is kind of connected in a way, so when you add just one variable like that, and especially with how quickly these worms reproduce, it can cause a lot of problems.
Yeah.
I just can't recommend it.
Yeah.
I don't really know the exact side effects of this one worm, but
Right.
I just know, knowing what I know in biology, I just know.
That's what I just wanted you to talk about in general, because I could
yes.
We were talking to our dad, and he was like, well, I'm just going to get some to put in here. And Tate was like, Dad, no.
I was like, please don't do that. And I think he probably still did it. if he's listening. I think you still did it.
Well, I just think it's really easy Don't! Dad, stop. I think it's really easy to not realize that wouldn't be any big deal at all. Like, I could totally see myself being like, I don't know what else to do with these, and not thinking at all about what those ramifications could be, because again, they're worms, they go in the ground. It seems like it'd be really minimal, but yeah, just it's like a ripple effect or a domino effect.
It is a huge ripple effect. Side tangent here, a lot of the invasive species we have in North America are from people just releasing their pets out into the wild, like out in streams, out in a nature area. They just release them, and then now we have all these invasive species that cause issues. So I just cannot, don't recommend doing that.
Like pythons in Florida, right? Is that from that?
Yeah, exactly. Yep, exactly. You got it. Or red-eared sliders. I don't know if you've seen those. Those are like all over the place now.
Interesting.
So yes, I recommend red wigglers. There are some other kinds of worms you can get, but red wigglers will reproduce quickly, and they also will eat everything you give them, except for obviously meat and dairy. And they do good in a container, so recommend those. And the recommended amount is like 1,000 worms per 1 pound of food that you food waste that you have to feed them. So I started off with 500 worms in my setup. The good thing about the setup is once you have it going, they kind of self-regulate. I mean, they'll kind of reproduce as much as they can, and it depends on how much you feed them. So basically, don't worry too much about how much worms to buy when you start, because you can always add more, or eventually some will just kind of die off and they'll kind of have their own carrying capacity, so we call it in biology, out in their container.
Nice.
Okay, so that's all of the materials.
Sorry, real quick. When it says recommended 1,000 worms per 1 pound of food, is that every so often?
Or for time? Yeah. They say online they've said you're supposed to feed them once a week ish.
So
I don't.
It'd be
I
1
typically
pound
don't
a
feed my
week
worm once a week. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So you wouldn't feed them all the time because it does take them a bit to kind of chomp through all the food and stuff, but it just depends on how many worms you have and how much food waste you have. So if you have a setup and you're having issues with it, that could be why, but we'll talk about that later.
So basically, if you are a cooking fanatic, you cook all the time, whether you have a family of people to feed or not, but you create a lot of food waste, versus if you're somebody like me who we cook, lately we've been cooking at home, I don't know, a couple days a week. You can kind of use that to gauge how many worms you would need to think about your food waste. Because if you were to ask me what's my food waste, I'd be like, I don't know. But really, when you think about it, it's going to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tate, but it would be all your scraps from chopping your veggies to make this.
Yeah.
So it's almost tied in a way to how often you cook.
Exactly. Yeah, it is tied to how often you cook. Or if you eat a lot of fruits and vegetables or something, say you have fruits and vegetables that you didn't even use and they went bad and you can't eat them anymore. That's something you could totally give to the worms and they'll take it out of your hands and eat it real quick.
Gotcha.
So,
but it's not you're going to take your plate after you ate dinner and go dump it in the...
Exactly. I mean, you can if it's
plant-based.
If you made a vegan meal. Right. So me and my boyfriend, we cook a lot of vegan meals. So sometimes we'll do that. I mean, sometimes I'll just put it in the bin because I just know there's no meat and dairy. But yeah, if you cook with meat and dairy, you probably can't just put it in the bin.
You would be thinking
because that will
more,
attract other animals.
right. And you would be thinking more of like as you're prepping food, all your scraps almost.
Yes.
Or like
yes.
you said, like
think
my
of
snacking veggies and my like fruits,
right.
all the extra pieces from the orange peel I didn't eat or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Orange peel, banana peels, any like if you're chopping a cucumber or a zucchini, so like any ends that you don't need, stuff like that.
Potato
you can actually
skins.
put eggshells.
Okay.
You could put eggshells in the compost.
Do you have to rinse them?
I think you just need to like kind of let them dry out.
Okay.
So just put them in the bin, whatever bin you have. Let them kind of dry out a little bit. Some people will like put them in the oven for a long time. I never have done that before. I usually just crunch them up and then just put them in there. But yeah, just as long as there's no like egg yolk or anything like that. You can also use eggshells. Worms will eat it. They like that calcium, I guess.
Cool. I just wanted to try to help people gauge because I think, thinking of your food waste is kind of hard, but because of you and I've been giving scraps to you, it made me learn how to pay attention to it in a way of like I'm thinking about it as I'm cutting things to prepare the dinner more than what I think I would originally think if think back old school, just plain old compost bin. It was more like you're just going to go outside because didn't Grandma and Papa have one? You're just going to go outside and like shove your food in a bin and, scrape your plate off into the bin.
I don't remember. I mean, I've seen people online say that you can put meat and dairy into your compost, and it will eventually break down, but the problem with that is that you will attract pests sometimes.
No thanks.
So
no thanks.
You don't want any, like, raccoons.
Well, especially because yours is, like,
whatever.
just out in your backyard, so...
Yeah, exactly.
You'll have creatures of the night all over that thing.
Oh, yeah. And also, like, some other recommendations online were to, like, make a food waste journal for, like, a week just to see,
That's a good idea.
how much food waste you kind of have, just to kind of gauge. But you can always start off with, like I started off with 500 worms, and if you're finding that it's not enough, you can always get more and add. I would definitely start off small and then add more.
Yeah.
But you can kind of gauge it as your system, like, as time goes on.
I think that's a good rule of thumb. Like, start small, you can always add on. Versus, what are you going to do if you just ordered 2,000 worms and you don't know what to do with them because you can't just release them into the wild? Okay, so you're convincing me, Tate. You're starting to make me feel like maybe this is the way to go. So hit me with the steps. Hit me with the steps.
So also, I kind of forgot to mention that whatever container you get for these, they need to have a lid. So as far as the steps go, so the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to take 2 of your containers. So for me, I'm just going to say plastic bins because that's what I use. But like I said earlier, you can also use like a 5-gallon bucket. And you're going to drill holes in the bottom of 2 of them. So I think I said earlier you'll need 3 plastic containers total. Because this is a stacking system, and I will get to that in a second. So you drill holes in the bottom of 2 of your plastic containers. Mine are about 1/2 inch in diameter, like the holes are, and they're about 1 inch apart. So you want to make sure that the bottom is still like secure and that things will stay in, but you want there to be holes for liquid to drain out or later for the worms to crawl up into. So after you do that, you also drill a couple holes on the sides of the containers near the top of the container. So this is for airflow. So remember when you were a kid and you trapped like grasshoppers or something and you had to like poke holes in the top of the lid? It's that kind of thing. So poke holes at the top. I have some holes in the lid as well, just to get some air in there, but you don't have to. Just make sure there's good airflow, basically.
You want holes on the bottom so that the stuff can drain out the bottom, and you want air holes. So drilling lots of holes all around it.
Yep. Then once you find a place for everything, you're going to place the bin with no holes in it, the one that you just kind of left alone. You're going to place it on the ground. So that's going to be basically where you're going to collect all the liquid that comes out of it when it rains, or just there's just some liquid that comes out of it naturally too. This is where all this is going to go, and you can use this for your fertilizer as well. So it's important to have this. Some people will drill a hole and stick a spigot on the side so that they can just like drain the liquid out from the spigot. I don't do that because I just didn't want to, and I just pour it out. But that's just a cool idea if you want to do that. So you're going to place that one on the ground that has 0 holes in the bottom, the one that you just left, like normal. And then you're going to stack one of the bins with holes on it on top of it. So now you should have 2 bins stacked on top of each other.
Question.
Yes.
The base bin that has no holes in the bottom still has air
Yes.
holes, or no?
No air holes. It has no holes.
No holes in the lid either?
Nope. There's no lid on it. So you take the lid off and you stack them inside of each other.
So it's like your tray that catches the water of your plant that you water.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. It's just there to kind of collect all the liquid and whatever. You know,
So
sometimes the worms get in there.
The second one is stacked inside of it.
Yes, the second one is stacked inside.
Gotcha. Okay.
So now you should have 2 bins stacked on top of each other. Okay, so now that you have the 2 bins stacked inside, one inside of the other, it is time to add like the soil and the bedding. So this is where sources kind of vary. And I'll be honest, I just kind of winged it because sources, different sites were saying different things. But you're gonna want to, so total with the bedding and soil, you're gonna want to fill it up about a little more than halfway.
Okay.
So my mixture that I used about 3/5 soil and 2/5 bedding. So AKA a little more than half of my like mixture was soil, and then the rest was bedding.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, I follow.
So you don't want to fill up the whole thing because you want there to be room for the worm castings to kind of start to grow. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Kind of like with your leca situation, you kind of had to like leca. You couldn't like fill it up all the way because the leca would then push the water out. It's kind of like that.
You want it halfway full, and your mix of the 2 things, there's just a little more soil than bedding.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, some people online said this is like vitally important, and some people said it isn't vitally important. For me, whatever I did seemed to work. I don't think the worms are that picky,
they're worms
really.
At the end of the day.
So, yeah, exactly. Okay, so this filled up a little over half of the bin for me. And like I said, you'll want to leave some room for the castings. So as they start to eat through the soil and the food you you give to them, the castings will kind of start to rise up.
And I guess that makes sense because if you're looking at this mixture that you just made of bedding and soil, it'll be probably pretty light looking in color. And you were saying you can tell the worm castings because it's super dark. So I can visualize now how you could tell the difference.
Exactly, yeah. It looks pretty different, and especially depending on what kind of bedding you use. So I use like those wood shavings, but if you use paper or cardboard, like that will start to disappear over time, and you can totally tell when it's time to harvest.
Nice.
Okay, so the next thing you'll want to do is you'll add water to the system. So just enough water to make it moist. You don't want any standing water at all, and you don't want it to be too dry. The worms like it to be just moist or just a little damp. I'm trying to think of a good way. I think online someone had said kind of like a damp sponge, like that kind of wetness. That you wring it out and then it's still kind of damp.
So do you... So right now, if I poured water in that mixture and kind of, mixed it all up with my hands...
Yeah, you'll have to mix it up.
Mix it all up, whatever.
Yep.
Can I then pick it up out of the base and just pour any excess water out? Do you know what I'm saying? If you put too much water, wouldn't it kind of drain through the bottom? Or no? Not really. That's not how it works.
It would drain through the bottom, but you don't want the soil to be like too wet, This is where sources vary online, and I'll just say from my experience, my worms are able to survive a lot.
Tate's breeding some pretty intense worms over there.
Yeah, they're getting only the fittest, man. I swear. But basically there shouldn't be any standing water. If there's standing water, then it is too wet. But in general, the soil and the bedding should just kind of soak up some of that water. And if you add too much water, you can also just put in more of that dry bedding.
That'll absorb.
To kind of even it out, because that will help dry it up and absorb it as well.
Cool. Got it.
So what I did for that was I literally just took my water hose and just added some water in.
Mix it up with your hands.
Nothing too fancy. So now, after you mix up the soil, bedding, and water, and it's all just kind of like a moist mixture, you're going to make a small hole in the center, and you're going to put your worms in there. So the worms that I got them online, so they had to be shipped to me, and they were kind of in rough shape. They were looking real thin and small. So it's important to kind of give them a couple days to like adjust to their new home, adjust to their, the whole setting that you put up for them. They do eat that dry material, so there is stuff in there for them to eat as well.
Okay.
And I think from Uncle Jim's worm farm, you can buy like actual worm food to put in there if you want to. I didn't find it necessary because I had food scraps ready to go within the next couple days, so I just gave them food scraps. But you just basically put them in there and then just let them kind of don't dig too deep and like force them down. They will go down on their own. They're kind of stunned from the travel. So just kind of let them be. And that's kind of the theme for this vermicompost is you just kind of want to let the worms do their thing. You don't want to mess with them too much. After you've given them a couple days to get used to their home, this is where you can start to feed them. So you can prepare your food scraps in a lot of different ways. Some people literally won't prepare their food scraps at all, and they'll just put them in, So say you have a whole...
Just like throw a whole banana peel in there?
Yeah, exactly. They'll throw a whole, or like a whole like half onion or whatever. I like to just roughly chop it all up. If I have food scraps, I'll just kind of chop it up a little bit. I don't dice it. Yeah, I don't dice it even that small. Honestly, I just give it a rough chop and then feed them. But it's up to you. Some people like to blend all of their food scraps and make it like a paste, because the smaller you get it, the faster it will get eaten in a way. But I mean, I put in like a whole like mushroom in there one time, and they ate it, and it's gone. I mean,
it came and it went.
So literally, yeah. So it is like up to you guys how you want to prepare your food scraps. I'm just saying there's a lot of different ways, and some people will claim that it's better to do one way over the other, but I kind of think, the worms will eat it regardless. So it just depends on how fast you want them to break it down.
The smaller, the faster they'll eat it.
Right, exactly. So the smaller it is, the faster they'll eat it. I just roughly chop mine into chunks. And I just throw them in. So whenever
I'll do a little bit of the work for you, but I'm not going to do that much work for you.
Yeah, I'm like, y'all ain't that picky. If you're hungry, you'll eat it.
Nothing else to do. Here you go.
Exactly. And like I said, if you have food that is kind of moldy and gross, like the worms will eat that. They'll eat the mold too. So they're not picky. They'll eat it all. As long as it's not meat or dairy.
Right.
And, okay, yeah. So once you've kind of prepared your food scraps, however that is for you, you're going to feed them. So what you're going to do now is you're going to kind of bury the food scraps in the soil and bedding to ensure that the worms can actually get to it. If you leave it on the top and not bury it at all, then it may be kind of harder for them to find it. Again, this is another thing that some people will just throw them in and just, leave them there. Some people will really bury it. I kind of am halfway in the middle.
Yeah.
Because, the worms don't really like to be messed with that much. It stresses them out.
Like, you don't want to dig up the whole bin all around because that's going to freak them out, kind of.
Exactly, yeah. So I just kind of lightly bury them. Exactly. So I just kind of cover it up with some soil. I dig like a little hole.
It's like you're planting a seed.
Put them in. Exactly, yeah. So you just kind of put them in there. And after that, you just kind of keep feeding the worms. Like, I would say, of course, again, this depends on how many worms you have and how much food you have. But once a week or once every 2 weeks would be a good, I think, rule of thumb to feed your worms.
Cool.
Or when you just get enough food scraps for them. And that's kind of how it goes. So that's the system. That's what you'll keep doing. And as you keep doing that, they will keep eating the food. They'll keep pooping out those worm castings. That's what you want for your plants. And eventually, the worm castings will kind of start to, like the soil, bedding, worm casting mix that you have in there will start to turn really dark in color. It'll look super, super dark. And the level will also kind of rise as they produce more and more.
Mm-hmm.
So once it kind of gets to that color and there's a lot of it in there, it's kind of up to you how you want to harvest them. But obviously, they're going to want, fresh soil and fresh bedding and all that stuff.
On to the next.
Yeah, here's how to transition your worms into a new bin. Just like you did the first time, you're going to set up your new bin. You're going to create a soil bedding mixture. And you're also, this time, going to add a couple handfuls of that worm castings from your full bin to the new fresh bin. This is just going to add a lot of the, microbes that are in there that are also helping decompose things, that are getting all those nutrients, as well as just kind of keep some of those same, chemical balance that was in there for the worms so that they'll kind of know what's up.
So
that
real
kind
quick
of thing.
Question.
Yes.
So this that we're talking about right now is my third bin. So my first bin, I do nothing to, and I just take the lid off. My second bin, I do the bottom holes and the air holes. The third one, I do the same thing. Bottom holes and air holes, and then just stick that one aside until I'm ready for this step we're doing right now.
Exactly.
Got it.
So once we get to this step, you do the same thing. You create your bedding soil mixture. You add a couple scoopfuls or handfuls of your vermicompost or of your castings that you have into your new fresh one, right? And this one has holes in it. Yeah, you mix it all together.
Okay.
And then you will stack this one on top of the full one. So the holes should be touching all of the worm castings or soil worm casting mixture that you have in your original bin, and you put the lid on top of the top one now. Does that make sense? So now you should have 3 stacked on top of each other.
Okay.
You have the bottom one that has no holes in it. That's just like the collecting tray.
Yep.
You have the middle one that's full of your worms and is full of worm castings, and you're ready to harvest them and make your fertilizer, but you got to get the worms out.
And the middle one is like placed inside almost, stacked inside the first one.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And now this one, you said you take the lid off.
And then this one, you take the, so you take the lid off and you stack this third new fresh bin on top of the middle one. You just stick it
on top of the mixture?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I see.
And it has holes in it. And then you put the lid on top of that top one.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
So if I were to look out, if we're at this step and I were to look out in your backyard, it would almost look like there's 2 bins stacked on top of each other.
Well, there should be 3 bins.
Well, but we can't really tell the one because it's sitting inside.
Oh, yes.
You know what I mean? If I'm
well, they're all sitting inside of each other. Okay. The lid is only on the like the top one
at all times, anytime.
Yes, at any time at all, the lid is on the top one. Basically, the soil mixture shouldn't be exposed.
So it's not going to be stacked really inside of it because it's full of stuff. So it's going to be sitting on top of that.
Okay, so you're saying. Yes. Right? Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. I
guess when you have been talking about this in the past, I was picturing all of this with the lids on. So I'm picturing... I've been
like
picturing...
3 separate?
Yes, like 3 stacked on top of each other. So I'm just trying to visualize lidless, what that would look like. But I understand now.
Yes. Yeah, and there's like a ton of resources for this online. So if this is confusing, there are step-by-steps, how-tos, and also like people have done this in all kinds of different ways.
Oh, I'm sure.
I would say the setup that I have is pretty easy and like less intensive than some online, but whatever, whatever works for you. But yeah, so now you should have 3 bins all stacked on each other. The lid is only on top, on the top bin at all times.
Got it.
So now you give your worms a couple days to kind of move upwards.
Migrate.
So they will notice, they're going to migrate up into that fresh bin. They're going to know that most of them should kind of get a sense of, oh, hey, there's fresh soil and food up there. And also these worms just naturally like to be towards the mid to top layer of soil. So if they sense that there's more soil above them, they're going to want to just naturally go up there. So once you've given them a couple days to move up, it is time to harvest your worm castings.
Yay.
So all you do is you basically are going to take that middle bin out, and that's it. You just move the fresh bin with all of your worms are hopefully moved up. That will now be moved into the
base bin.
And then you have your bin full of worm castings.
Wow.
And then you rinse and repeat. So when that one gets full, you do the whole thing over again.
Wow, yeah.
But it takes a long time. So I started my compost in the summer.
Yeah, that sounds right.
I want to say this summer, and it is now March, and I am just now getting to the point where I'm about to transition them up into their new bin.
For the first time?
Yes, for the first time. So it can take a bit, and obviously it depends on how many worms you have and how much food waste you give them, how much you feed them, right?
Right. Lots of variables.
So I think that's why mine is taken. Exactly. But in general, that's what it will look like.
Cool. Yeah.
So yeah, you just rinse and repeat that. And now, when you harvest the worm castings, this is where you can make fertilizer.
Okay, yeah. Now I have a whole bin of worm poop. What do I do with it?
Yes. So it's good to know, or as you go through it, you may see a couple stragglers here and there. So a couple worms. So you may have to kind of, take them and put them back into this fresh bin. You can use like a stick.
Friends.
I usually have a stick. Exactly. Go put them back with their friends. There will be a couple that probably just haven't made it up there yet.
Yeah.
Or there may not be. Ideally, there wouldn't be any, but
could be some stragglers.
Yeah. So just to be aware of that. And so now that you have all these worm castings, there's multiple ways you can go about using them. So what a lot of people do is they make like a worm casting tea. So they'll fill up some water and then they'll put some worm castings in it, let it steep for a while, and they'll use that as their like liquid fertilizer. As far as like measurements go, there are recipes out there for like the exact ratios. Honestly, I haven't really been doing the exact ratios. I've just kind of been winging it. I think I would do about like 1/4 worm castings, 3/4 water, let it sit for a while, a couple days maybe, let it really steep, and then you just use that water to kind of water your plants, and that's the fertilizer.
Nice.
You can also use the worm castings as an organic like fertilizer to add directly into the soil. So say you got a new plant that likes super moist soil and doesn't really like to dry out a lot. You can just mix some of those worm castings into the soil, and that will add a lot of that moisture component, and will add a lot of nutrients to the soil. A lot of good microbes and a lot of good like fertilizer directly into the soil. So that's another way to use them. A third option is to just put the worm castings on top. And so every time you water it, the water will leach those nutrients down into the soil as well.
Nice.
Yeah, and there's probably even more ways to use worm castings, but those are the main three that I think are
easiest.
Yeah, easiest and the ones that are the most popular.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a win-win. You're making your own fertilizer, you're getting rid of your food waste, and the system really doesn't take that much upkeep. So
yeah, it sounds like you set it and forget it.
Yes, you do set it and forget it, and honestly, at the very beginning, I liked to check on the worms and see how they were doing, so I would kind of dig around in there, but they don't really like that, you know? They like to be left alone. They want to just have their privacy. They want to do their thing. They want to eat their food and not be, dug up all the time. So it is a very much set it and forget it. It's good to always check on it. Like, you can open the lid if it smells bad or if there's some other kinds of issues going on. It's good to just go out and see what's happening with your Vermicompost. But in general, try not to like dig up too much.
Right. Especially when you first get it going, you want to like make sure it's going. But I'm sure it's the type of thing, like almost everything, once you can start to figure it out and you're on a roll and you're kind of on your little system for your food scraps, I bet it becomes pretty easy and mindless.
Yeah, it becomes pretty easy. It's very easy to me. I mean, I think it's pretty easy for anybody because it's very like, you can make it work for you. You know what I mean? If you're the kind of person that likes to like measure everything out and have this whole setup be like as, awesome and as clean as possible, then you can do that. But if you're also like me and you just kind of didn't want to waste your food and wanted fertilizer, you can have a setup that also works. It's pretty easy and not that intensive, I just drilled some holes in some bins. I mean, that's really all I did. Some people will put like screens at the end of the bins and have a whole setup with a spigot at the bottom, and they have a whole shelf for them and like all this stuff. So
the possibilities are endless.
Exactly. So if you go and check on it and you notice like it smells really bad, there are some solutions to that. So number one is you're probably adding too much food in there and there's not enough worms to eat them. So your food's basically rotting before the worms can even get to it. And that can be an issue because that can attract other animals or other insects that you don't really want. So if that's happening, make sure you just kind of scale back how much food you put in there for the worms. If it starts to stink and you don't think that it's a food issue, then there's probably just too much moisture just in the compost in general. So you'll want to add more bedding to dry it up. I've had to do that before. We had a really rainy couple of weeks and I just forgot to check out my worms. And so I go out there. I realized I was like, oh my God, my worms. And so I go out there and they were literally in standing water. So I thought they were dead.
Mass
I was
extinction
like, oh my God,
number one.
Yeah, I was like, damn it. So I took the middle bin out, and like you said, there's holes. So the water drained out. And I collected all that water because, it had all those nutrients in it.
Nice.
I still have some of that, by the way. And collected all of that and then put that back in. And, as I was going through the water, there was a lot of worms in the water in that, like, tray bin. But I got a stick and I got them out and they just, wiggled their way back into the soil and they were fine. A lot of them were fine. I was like, okay, so that was the first mass extinction event. I'm sure some of them did not live. The second mass extinction event that I've had was over the winter storm we had. I didn't bring them inside, and so I thought for sure they would all die. Like,
for so long.
It was so cold. It was so
cold. A whole
cold.
week of freezing temperatures.
And I'm sure a lot of them actually... Yeah, for so long. And I thought, so whatever. I go out there and check on them after everything had kind of melted, and a lot of them were still doing fine. They were alive. I guess they had deep thawed.
Kept going.
And we're back at it. So, yeah, that's why I think these worms are really hardy. And another pro is that if a lot of them do die, they will reproduce within the system. So you're not having to go out and buy more worms, really, unless you have like a lot of food that you need taken care of quickly. They do reproduce as much as they can. And that also just depends on how much you feed them. how many resources are available within the system that they're in. But yeah, it's a pretty cool, like, self-sustaining system almost. All you have to do is feed it, and then when it gets full, just switch them to that new bin. And then you have all of your worm castings. And you could even, I mean, I'll have so much that Taryn, I could probably give you some.
Love it.
Like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So, but yeah.
Question.
I was going to say, any questions?
I feel like I have a good idea of what it looks like if you feed them too much. How would you know if you're not putting enough food scraps in there? Would there be any signs, or would you just think you're feeding them fine and it would just maybe move slow, or like what would happen really?
I think it would just move pretty slow.
Okay.
So basically what would happen is I'm sure some of the worms would die because they wouldn't be eating as much, and there wouldn't be enough food for them. But the worms that do live, it would just be pretty like a slow system. I think there have been times where I kind of didn't feed them as much as I should have. But if you start feeding them again, over time they'll start to reproduce and they'll make more of them. It just depends on how much food you give them. And also you'll notice that, like, at least if you have a new system, you'll notice that it's taken a while for the soil and bedding. Like, you'll see a lot of, like, the bedding from last time, or maybe you'll see a lot of food that you put in there last time that's still there. If there's, like, not enough worms, if that makes sense.
Okay, right. So basically, if I go out there weekly, which this will very much depend on how you do everything. Lots of variables. But basically, when I go out there, if I'm going out there weekly-ish, I wouldn't really see the food I brought out there last time.
Yeah.
If we were on the right kind of system, if you're seeing the food that you took out there last time, they're moving slow,
right,
for some reason. So either you don't have enough.
You may see some of the food, but it will look different. You know what I mean? Like, it'll
look
same.
like it's been worked on.
Yeah. And you're also kind of burying it a little bit too, so you shouldn't see all of it.
True. Yeah.
But yeah, there's not really like a sign to know if you're not feeding them enough. It'll just
nothing's gonna go wrong basically if you're not feeding them enough. They're just gonna be slow.
Exactly. They'll just be a little slow.
Some will probably die, but then
but you just feed them more. It's kind of, you just kind of have to figure out that balance.
Right.
And it's really not that hard, honestly. Also, I also wanted to say, one time I went out there and I did see some, like, fly larvae in there. Mm-hmm. And so I freaked out and was like, oh my God, get out of my compost. So I got the freaking stick and, like, got all these maggots out, because that's what fly larvae are. They're maggots. And I got them out and I put them on my little bird feeder, and I was like, you're going to be food for the birds here. Get out of my compost. So then I go and look online, and actually they're fine in your compost, because they're also breaking down food. They're also pooping nutrient-rich things, and they're going to turn into a fly and leave. So obviously you don't want a lot of flies near your compost. I haven't had any more issues. It happened to me one time. So it was weird. But you'll probably
no need to freak out, basically.
Exactly. You will see other little crawlies in there. I had a spider in there. It was actually a pretty cool looking spider. It actually died. So R.I.P. But yeah, don't freak out if you have other little crawlies in there. It'll be okay. They also help the system. They break down some other food. As long as they're not eating your worms, you should be fine. So, a lot. And
I'm sure if you start to see a lot of anything,
yes, then it's okay.
That might be more of a red flag.
Yes, exactly. But just don't freak out if you see a couple little creepy crawlies here and there. They're fine as long as they're not touching your worms. And a lot of them don't. A lot of them don't mess with your worms. You should be good. And if you have this, I definitely recommend going online and seeing what other people have to say, because I personally don't have a lot of experience with that, because any other insect I see or any other animal or whatever I see in there has not been a problem for me. So
yeah, I'm sure I can only imagine how much there is out there on this subject.
Oh, there's a lot.
I obviously haven't researched it, but I'm sure, just like with anything we talk about on this podcast, like, we are by no means expert. This is our take and our experience. And we encourage you to get out there on the internet, like we know you will, and look up how all the different people do it.
Right.
I think I've talked to you about this too, Tate, but, like, I really love, once in a while, they haven't come up actually now in a while, but one night, it was really late at night, and I was just, like, on my phone, and I got on YouTube, and there was, like, a worm compost, like, time lapse where they had, like, clear bins, and
that's
showed
cool.
them, like, breaking down the food, and they were long videos. Obviously, that were time lapse though, and they are so satisfying to watch. So if you're
I've
one
never
of those
seen
people
that.
Like weird, satisfying videos, look up some like worm composting videos on YouTube. There's some pretty entertaining like Whoa.
That's awesome. Yeah, I
Videos.
want to look that up because I've always wondered,
It's interesting to watch. It's
Yeah.
great. It's, exactly what you would expect as far as like, you don't even know how, or you can't almost tell how the food's disappearing, but it's just
Because you don't see the worms eating them. They just go in the ground, and then your food
They just
disappears,
wiggle around.
.
Yeah, it's so funny.
It is crazy. Like I put in it's pretty cool to watch your food disappear. Like I put in, I put in pretty large chunks of things that I'm like, oh, that's gonna take a while for them to get to, and within the next couple of weeks, the whole thing is gone.
Wow.
When you like chop up broccoli and you have that whole just like piece at the end,
chunk.
the chunk. Yeah, I've put that in there, not chopped up one time because I was just lazy, and I was like, they'll get to it.
They'll get around to it.
Yeah, it just, I think like 2 weeks later I went out, it was gone.
Dang.
It was gone. They had eaten it completely, so it's
it.
pretty cool. It's really satisfying, honestly, to have one. I definitely recommend it for anybody.
It's got to feel good too.
Yeah, it just
feels like
it's nice to not like okay, sometimes my boyfriend and I will buy, like apples and like fruits to eat for snacks, or like just stuff that we don't ever, sometimes we don't get to it.
Yep.
And I would feel
Just
horrible
happens.
throwing that away because I'm like, oh my God, I'm wasting all this food.
This is the problem, yeah.
And it's just nice to have a use for that. That it's not really, maybe you didn't eat it, but you're getting some kind of use out of it.
Purpose.
You're feeding your worms. You're going to feed your plants with that later.
Yep.
And like I said earlier, my plants freaking love it. My plants go crazy for this stuff.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, and it's noticeable. It's noticeable. 2 weeks ago, I fertilized my kale and my spinach. And they're freaking huge now.
And they're not even like
this
in
is the kale and
season.
spinach that froze over.
Oh my gosh, that's so crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, they're still growing. I don't know if they're in season. I should probably harvest them now. They're pretty big, but...
You're going to have a fresh-ass salad.
Dude, yeah.
Yum.
Yeah, I'm going to have a fresh... No non-GMO, no fertilizer.
Nice. Yeah, organic, right?
Organic.
That's so awesome.
We'll see how good it actually tastes.
I bet it's going to be good. You're going to be like, wow, I never knew spinach could taste like this without 1 trillion chemicals and pesticides all over it.
I'm like, wow, I don't have stomach ulcers now after eating this. It's great.
I love tasting all the nutrients that are supposed to be in this food.
But yeah, that's my presentation on
Vermicompost.
I
learned so much. And here's the thing, I've been hearing about this for almost a year now.
I've been trying to convince Taryn for so long. Like, you gotta get a Vermicompost. It's easy. And Taryn's like, ew, I don't want to mess with worms.
I was really on board. The thing that really made me go, I don't know, is the idea of other creepy crawl maggots being in there. I don't know if I can handle that. But I do think if I were to do it, I would put it in my garage.
That would help.
And then I'm sure you wouldn't have as much. Like yours is out exposed to the elements. So I don't think it would be as big of a problem. So
yeah, if you had yours in your garage, you probably would have way less interference with any other animal. Right. Yeah, so mine's outside. That's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, mine is outside, so that's why I've had creepy crawlies in there. But yeah, if you have yours in a shed or in your garage, you probably won't have that issue.
Right. Well, wow. We learned what it takes.
And you save money on fertilizer.
Yeah.
And my plants like it better than any fertilizer
it's organic,
I've bought.
Right? And you can buy it. I've bought
it is organic.
From Jim's Worm Farm.
Like they have worm castings, right?
I've bought that and mixed it into my soil before, but I've never used it as a true fertilizer. So I'm excited to try that with your homemade worm cast.
Yeah, I'll give you some worm tea.
Worm tea. Spill that worm tea.
I'll spill it. Spill the tea for your plants.
Yes, for real. Well, that was great. If you guys have any thoughts on worm bins, do you already have one? Do you have a spigot at the bottom of yours? Do you have questions? I feel like I'm sure there's more questions I could have maybe asked, but again, I've been hearing about this for a year and I kind of know your setup a little bit. So if you guys have any questions on this subject or topic, if you're wanting to get started, I know Tate would love to help you get started on this and encourage you to take that step to just do it. So if you have questions or have anything to share with us about your worm bins, your vermicompost that you have at home, you can share that with us on Instagram and Twitter. Our handle is @plantthatsis. Our website, plantthatsis.com, and you could email us, plantthatsis@gmail.com.
Exactly. And I also want to mention, which I didn't mention this earlier, is that if you don't have a yard or a garage, you can still have it indoors because it does not smell. You can have you could have a smaller setup. It's very versatile. So
you can do a real
whatever
little one.
living situation you're in, whatever living situation you're in, you could probably figure out some kind of setup That was my always hesitation.
I'm thinking now too, I could almost, since it doesn't smell, because it's really hard for me to get past or get it through my head that it doesn't smell.
It does not smell.
But now that you say that, I could almost just stick a bin at the bottom of my pantry by my trash can.
Yeah, literally.
And you could just have it right there where you throw your food away.
You totally could. Yeah.
Possibilities are endless, friends.
Exactly. See? It's just like, why not? You know?
Why not?
Yes, but yes, please, if you have any questions or you just want to share your setup and what you've done to make it work for you, please share. We would love to see it.
Thank you guys so much for listening. We love chatting with you. We love to hear from you, so hit us up.
Yes.
And catch y'all next week.
Yes, thanks so much for listening. Bye.
Okay, bye.